here, we're going to introduce Cathy Huyghe. She is the co-founder at Enolytics, author of Hungry for Wine. And today she's going to talk to us about wine plus data, an unlikely union. Cathy Huyghe is an award-winning journalist and entrepreneur and an engaging public speaker. She's the co-founder and CEO of Enolytics, a data-driven business intelligence provider to the beverage alcohol companies around the world. She's a columnist for Forbes about the business and politics for the wine industry, and she writes for Inc.com about mindfulness practices for entrepreneurs, particularly in the hospitality industry. She's a featured commentator for Reign of Terror, episode of the Netflix series Rotten, which has been nominated for an Emmy Award. Enolytics is a featured protagonist in a Harvard Business School case study in business analytics. All right, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Cathy up on our stage. Cathy, appreciate your patience hanging out there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak at the DATAcated Conference.
I'm so hanging out, Kate. I'll hang out for you anytime. So thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to just give kudos for sure to Martin and Kendall, who just spoke before me. They each reached out ahead of time to just make sure that we had our content together and that we weren't overlapping. And great job, the both of you. And I'm super excited to sort of bring some perspective around wine and data and sort of this unlikely pairing of wine and data to the stage here, to the conference. So what I'd like to invite you to do is to think about the experience of wine, to think about tasting wine, to think about how wine gets into your glass, to think about what it took to bring that wine to your table. Normally we think about the vineyard, we think about the salesperson, we think about the people, maybe the restaurant or the sommelier that you really like. What I'd really like to do today is to kind of reimagine that experience, that journey through the lens of data. So let's think about it in 4 different ways. So each step of the journey creates their own kind of data, right? So let's think about the first step of the wine experience, which is in the vineyard. There are vineyards all over the world. There's vineyards in every single US state. And I'm sure, most countries are just because of climate change, sort of the vineyard acreage is growing all the time. So what kind of data do you get from the vineyard? You get viticultural data, you get climate data, you get precipitation data, you get yield, you get a lot of information, as a matter of fact, that informs the conversation around sustainability and environmental change and global warming and that sort of thing. So that's kind of step 1 in kind of the data journey of your wine experience. Step 2, we could think about as taking those grapes that grow in the vineyard and taking them into the winery. So maybe you know about wines like Sauvignon Blanc that are made in steel tanks, or maybe you know about wines from Burgundy that use oak barrels. So there's a lot of data generated within sort of the winery itself, the building of the winery itself, both in terms of the financial implications of some of those decisions around making wine, but also in terms of things like blending and alcohol levels and fermentation process and things like that. So that's kind of step 2. We go from the vineyard into the winery, and then it goes out to the market. And so we've got sales and marketing data, which is sort of a beast of its own, if you want to think about it like that. And some of the areas that are especially topical right now around data for wine is in e-commerce. So during COVID, of course, like most industries that typically are sold in a retail environment, a lot of the transactions in the commerce shifted to online. So e-commerce during COVID just boomed in terms of data, in terms of analysis of the data, and also in terms of embracing data. There's some sayings sort of floating around the industry that COVID facilitated and just sort of moved forward the use of data in an e-commerce environment by like 15 years within about 6 to 8 months. So COVID in the sense of facilitating and accelerating the use of data for the e-commerce part of the wine industry was actually really beneficial. So, but in terms of sort of the third step of our wine experience journey through data, you've got the vineyard, you've got the winery, you've got the sales and the marketing arm, and then ultimately we get to us, to the consumers, right? So what kind of data is generated around wine consumption? So we've got, I'm sure that you all are familiar with, if you're wine drinkers, familiar with different apps like wine.com or like Vivino or Wine Searcher maybe. All of those apps are generating tons and tons and tons of data in terms of consumer sentiment, consumer behavior, and also consumer purchasing. So that is, in terms of the kind of the fourth step of the journey, it's us, right? It's us drinking wine. It's what we buy, what we pull from the retail shelf. It's what we order at the restaurant. So those four steps create a tremendous amount of data. The opportunity from the entrepreneurs in the wine world is that for as much data as there is, there's very little analysis of the data or business intelligence around the data. So that as an entrepreneur, that's the opportunity that we have seen. So which is not to say that there are not people within the wine industry who are sincerely interested and active around data. It's just that there's not a lot of us. But I reached out, as I was preparing for this presentation, I reached out to my community. My company, we publish a newsletter every Friday. It's called Enolytics 101. And it is, we've generated and cultivated conversations and relationships within the wine industry who are doing really interesting things with data. So I reached out to them and I said, look, I'm talking at this DATAcated conference, and I'd really love to hear what the community thinks are some of the challenges and also the opportunities within the wine industry around data. So they responded with a couple different things. One is access to the data, and maybe you'll find this to be true in your industries as well. One is access to the data. And a lot of that has to do, in the US anyway, with sort of the holdovers of alcohol and the sale of alcohol dating back to prohibition. It's actually extremely regulated. It's not, the data is not easily available or easily found. So that's one of the challenges. And kind of a correlated challenge is that data is fragmented. It's not easily found, and what is found is found in a piecemeal kind of way. There's no kind of synthesized way to bring those four steps of the wine journey together, from the vineyard to the winery to the sales to the consumer. So for the most part, those four phases of the wine experience remain discrete. And for what the kind of work that's done with the data, it's pretty much limited to the great big companies who have the bandwidth and the resources to employ teams of data scientists, which is just not very many companies. So I think that there's three opportunities that I'd like to just focus on for the last few minutes here when it comes to wine and data. One is definitely the opportunity within the wine world for data analysis, whether that's analysts coming on board for different companies, or the way that Enolytics is engaging is that we're building products to scale that can be brought in-house by the different wine businesses and spirits businesses and beer businesses that we are expanding out to. So the opportunity is the lack of analysis, the lack of business intelligence around the data. So and how, what's the chance for entrepreneurs especially to fill that gap. The second opportunity is around education. So education about data. And for this, Enolytics has partnered with the Data Lodge and Valerie Logan, who is a former VP for analysis at Gartner and Avanta, and she coined the concept of ISL, information as a second language. So this idea of data literacy is her domain expertise. And what we've teamed up to do is to bring and develop a dialect of data literacy for the wine and spirits world. So we're really excited about that. We're really excited about bringing education around data to this industry. So the opportunity is for business intelligence and analysis. That's the first opportunity. The second opportunity is for education and data literacy. And then the third opportunity is actually, I think, one of the most empowering things that the industry is starting to recognize is the power of the data that they already have in-house. They're looking inward. Rather, I had some of our early clients say to us, I get the power of Vivino data and Amazon data and Google Analytics. I get it. But don't we, in our little winery, already have data of our own? And so what's been happening is this look inward, and it's totally true. There's an increased appreciation for the data that a wine business or a spirits business or a distillery or brewery already has, whether that's e-commerce data, their own customer database, whether that's their viticultural data, whether it's their production data, their marketing data, the social media data, as you heard from Kendall. All of those are opportunities for analysis. And what I'm definitely seeing is this look inward for actually businesses within the spirits and wine and beer world to get more intimate around their own data, rather than sort of look outward, which is a little bit overwhelming for an industry like the wine world that is already a little bit behind the curve when it comes to data analysis. It's really, I think, exciting to see the wineries look inward and start with their own data. So yeah, so just to recap real quick, Kate, thinking about the wine experience through those 4 steps of the journey and thinking about it through the lens of data. So data in the vineyard, data in the winery, the sales and marketing data, and finally consumer data. And then the 3 opportunities around data within the wine and spirits world. The first is for analysts and business intelligence. The second would be for education, especially data literacy. And the third would be to the opportunity for businesses to use the data and monetize the data that they already have. So let me kind of wrap up with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cathy. I love the presentation. I love your story. We got a lot of great comments and questions that came in here. I'll start with one that was pretty funny from Jeff. He says, doesn't the adage go, beer than wine, always fine?
or it's also sort of wine is fine, but liquor is quicker, right? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a saying in Russian that I'm aware of. I'm not sure about the American versions. But I haven't heard of ISL before, so that's actually pretty interesting. We did have some comments around that as well. That it's a pretty new term for me. So it's information as a language or second language.
Yeah, ISL, information as a second language, and I see Valerie Logan in the chat box there. And the Data Lodge is her company, and there is also we've made announcements around our partnership, and just really excited to take that concept and raise the bar around awareness and education about data within the wine and spirits world with Val's help and with sort of this ISL or information as a second language. Val thinks that totally in your LinkedIn profile, Kate, you should have, I'm fluent in data. Maybe you're fluent in French, maybe you're fluent in German, but add you're fluent in data to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. We'll take a question here from Jeffrey. He's asking, were your analytics affected by supply chain constraints over the last year?
Definitely. Thank you for that question. So something that we're seeing when we work with e-commerce data, for example, and also depletion data, which is how alcohol moves throughout the system in the US anyway, is that 2019 is the benchmark for 2021. like wineries and businesses and analysts are just almost kind of saying 2020 was such a wreck that nothing's accurate. Like all of our trending is off, like all of our forecasting is kind of all over the place. So let's kind of focus in on, the first 6 months or the first 3 months of 2019 and benchmark against that for 2021. So there's definitely some adjustments that need to happen.
And that makes sense. And just one last question before we let you go from Kelly. What wine pairs best with data?
So can I just sort of say something funny? And Kate, you did a great job by pronouncing my last name. But that's the first question that I get asked most often is, how do you pronounce your last name? The second question that I get asked most often is, what's my favorite wine? To which I cheekily reply, the wine that's in my glass.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. I love it. I love it. Well, Cathy, thank you so much for the amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for taking some of our questions. Really appreciate your time here.
Absolutely. And please do reach out over LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect or to make connections for other people in the industry or who are doing some really exciting things. Thanks,
Awesome.
Kate.
Thank you so much.